What are the US government's global plans? Does she have an agenda for the Earth's population? In the grounds of the US Embassy in London, England, is a statue of the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his famous words are, "Nothing happens in politics by accident. If it happens, it was planned that way." This map shows that the United States military has carved out the entire Earth into different regions or zones, each ending in COM, which is an abbreviation for command. The United States has a rough estimate of 500 to 800 military air bases all over the globe, where many have suffered to benefit the self-interest of the US global strategy. Serbian farmers in the Balkans have not been compensated for their land space when the US took 755 acres of countryside and built its biggest overseas military base in the former Yugoslavia in Kosovo called Camp Bondsteel, built by Halliburton, which is situated near an oil pipeline. In 1968, the British government removed the entire indigenous population of 1,500 Eloy people from the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean and have rented the land to the United States for 50 to 70 years. The Eloy have been fighting in the British courts to return to their homelands, which seems highly unlikely, for most of it has been turned into a US military base called Diego Garcia, which has been used to fly planes to bomb Iraq in both Gulf Wars. But in order to know the US plans, we need to go to New York City, the headquarters of the US think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations. Richard N. Haas is its current president, and it is quite obvious how influential it is for the people who are its members or who pass through. Angelina Jolie and Condoleezza Rice, the 66th Secretary of State. Hillary Rodham Clinton, the 67th United States Secretary of State and former First Lady of the United States, and many of the top military brass whose presence influences American foreign policy. Its July-August 2012 edition of its magazine called Foreign Affairs outlined American foreign policy and its strategic plans in detail. The United States' ability to lead the international community is still invaluable and unmatched. Its economy is still by far the largest, most developed, and most dynamic in the world. Its military remains much more capable than any other. The United States' network of alliances and partnerships ensures that the country really has to act alone. The United States has 1.4 million men and women in uniform. American forces stationed abroad should be aiming to prevent conflict, build the capacity of key partners, maintain core alliances, and ensure the US military's ability to secure American interests in critical regions. As the United States recalibrates its global military posture, it must continue to work closely with its NATO allies. US air and naval forces will likely spend stints in Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and potentially Iraq. On the Korean Peninsula, for example, the presence of some 28,000 US personnel reminds Seoul that the United States stands ready to defend South Korea against North Korean aggression. Further south, US naval and air forces engaged in Australia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand gives allies in Southeast Asia greater confidence that the United States will not abandon the region at a time of great change and uncertainty. Why has the United States always maintained a strong relationship with Israel, a state that has violated every single one of the international laws? And why does the United States want Bashar al-Assad removed from Syria? Is it because he is a so-called dictator, or are there other reasons?
So far in my talks about how the world really works, I've covered how Satan rules the world from behind the shadows. Then I spoke about the Vatican also known as the papacy or the Roman Catholic Church, also rules the world and controls religion. And then last time I spoke about how the world is ruled through banking, which is actually another arm of the papacy, because the central banks, which are owned by the Rothschilds, we have to bear in mind that the Rothschilds basically are agents of the papacy. And like it says in the Encyclopedia Britannica and in F. Tapasos's book, it says that the Rothschilds are keepers or guardians of the Vatican treasury. So now I want to talk about the military industrial complex, which is run through Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, or some like to say humorously, the District of Criminals. So according to many books I've read, America is still a colony, yes, and I know that's hard to believe because in history we're constantly being told that America fought the War of Independence to free itself from Great Britain. But what we have to understand is that everything is done by deception, especially when it comes to war. There's a book called The Art of War they say it was written by a Chinese man named Sun Tzu, but from my research, I believe that Sun Tzu was a fictional character. I believe that book was actually written by a Jesuit, and that the book itself, The Art of War, is a Jesuit manual. So in that book, the point I wanted to make is that in that book, it says all warfare is based on deception. So that would include the war for independence, the Revolutionary War that was fought by the Americans against the British. So, I was saying that America is a colony of Great Britain and was incorporated as a corporation in 1871 through the Act of 1871. This act also created the District of Columbia, a 10-mile square parcel of land. So some things that are common in the three city-states that I've been talking about, is the Washington D.C. being the third one, is that the Vatican, the City of London, and Washington D.C. all have their own flags. They all have their own police force, and they have a mayor, and they also have an obelisk. An obelisk is found in all three city-states. An obelisk being a phallic symbol. Another way to explain it is that it represents the reproductive organs, or reproductive male organ. So something else that's interesting as well is that most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Roman Catholics, the same power that the Pilgrims fled from. So what we have to understand is that before the War of Independence, Roman Catholics were actually a persecuted minority in America. They were not allowed to hold public office, and even their worship services were restricted. Basically, they were not free. Roman Catholics were not free before the War of Independence, but after the war, they became more free and started to use the constitution to say that Catholics should also be allowed to worship freely, because the American Constitution allows freedom of worship. So the Catholics also claim that as well. So besides being in control of the world's reserve currency, the US dollar, America polices the world through its military. So let me just clarify that. Yes, the US dollar is printed in America, but what we have to understand is that the central banks, of which the Federal Reserve is just one central bank of many, they are all owned by the Rothschilds, because the Rothschilds basically own the Bank of England, and they bought the Bank of England through deception, because the Rothschilds made it look like when France and England were fighting, they made it look like England had lost, and then because the English then started dumping their stock, they then bought up the stock at a cheap price, and that's how they ended up owning the Bank of England. And then from there they sent their agents to America to set up a central bank, and one of them was Jacob Schiff. He was one of the agents that was sent to America, and another one was Paul Warburg, and someone else as well that was involved in the setting up of the Federal Reserve was JP Morgan, who owned the White Star Line that built the Titanic, on which many rich people, three of the richest people, were on board when the Titanic sank. And in fact, it said that by those who were on board the Titanic, that gunshots were heard as the ship was sinking, which makes me think that there were agents who were sent to make sure that certain individuals would not survive the sinking of the Titanic. Also remember that when the lifeboats were being lowered into the sea, it was said that it's only women and children should be on the lifeboats, not men. So they wanted to make sure that not just those three richest men who were on the ship, but all the other rich people, because the richest people in the world were on that ship, and they wanted to make sure that they were all killed and would not survive and resist the setting up of the Federal Reserve in America. That was in 1912. The Federal Reserve was set up in 1913, and President Woodrow Wilson, who was a puppet of the bankers, basically signed a law which allowed for the establishing of the Federal Reserve in America. So yeah, so America basically also polices the world through its military, and just make sure that I don't forget, I just wanted to mention that America is fighting all these wars on behalf of the papacy, because we have to remember that I've mentioned many times that the papacy is the one that's ruling the world on behalf of the devil, who hides behind the curtain. So they don't have an army. I mean, not counting the Swiss guards who protect St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. They don't have an army. So America fights all these wars around the world on behalf of the papacy, and America is known to have between 750 and 800 military bases around the world. Now, some have said that, well, what about China? No, China is coming up. China is going to be the next superpower. I mean, that's nonsense. The Holy Scriptures don't mention China as a superpower or an empire that's going to come up and overtake the US. It's Revelation 13 mentions two beasts. The first beast that's mentioned in the first half of that chapter is the papacy that comes up out of the sea representing a heavily populated area. And then the next beast that's mentioned from verse 11 to the end of the chapter is the United States, which comes up in, it says the beast comes up out of the earth, which is a sparsely populated area. Those are the two that we need to watch out for in these end times, the papacy and the United States of America. Not China. China doesn't have military bases except for one in Djibouti. It only has one military base, but in time they might have more. But at the moment, America has many hundreds of bases around the world for the purpose of policing the world, obviously. And like it says in Revelation 13, that America basically has occupied or set up those bases in different countries, but based on deception. You know, they keep saying that they're being attacked, such as what happened in 9/11, but we know that 9/11 was an inside job.